Welcome to the Sheffield Sunday As-Bill season meeting. This is a main share meeting, and today it is with great pleasure and much gratitude that we welcome Tom J. from California, who's come to share for about 40 minutes, after which we'll open up for general sharing or if you'd like to ask a question. Thank you so much, Tom. It's wonderful to have you here, and the floor is yours.
There we go, unmuted. I heard this once, and I think it's the first time I'll repeat it. Good morning, family. And I'm going to expound upon that a lot. So good morning, good afternoon, depends where you're from, right? Good day. My name's Tom, and I'm going to start it with the word gratitude, and I'm going to try to end it with the word gratitude, even though it's used a lot in our tribal circle, or in this case, Hollywood Squares. But I'm going to sort of unpack it and take a deep dive into the verb aspect of the word gratitude, not the noun. And so I first want to thank you guys for inviting me back. Young, thank you. I met Young in New Zealand, where I had the pleasure of giving a pitch there at the international section. And he so graciously befriended me, as we all do. Isn't that amazing? I don't know where else that happens. Unconditionally. And that's really what I'm hoping to spend the majority of the time talking about. 40 minutes is pretty good. So there leaves me a little room to do what I don't like to do, and that's to talk about where I came from. Now, I understand the importance of that because I do a lot of 12-step calls. A lot. And so I understand the value of our story. But our story only gets us here. What happens when we get here? So I hope that you'll join me on a little journey for this next 40 minutes into the practical application of the experience. You notice I didn't say the steps or the work. I said the experience because I think it's all encompassing. And there are certain things that I think are important to shed light on, other than just pontificating about do the steps, get a sponsor, 90 meetings in 90 days. These things are important headlines, like in a newspaper. But how do you bring them to life? And what's underneath them? And so if there was a heading to this talk, I'd like it to be the blood and the ink. That's the title. The blood and the ink. So what is the ink? Here's the ink. I'm afraid my camera might be backwards, but here's the ink, right? By the way, I'm proud of this. It's my first edition. Pretty cool book. And a nice original 12 by 12. And one of my favorite ones that you don't hear talked about too often is AA Comes of Age. That's the ink, right? We all know the ink because it's always being talked about. I love the word pontificating, It's always do the steps, or I'm doing the fourth, or read the preamble. So that's the ink. There's a lot of ink in AA. There's a lot of literature. There's a lot of suggested rules. I love that one, suggested rules, right? But then what's the other half of that heading or that title? The blood. What is the blood? Well, I'm looking at it. You're the blood. The blood is what knocked on the door of Bill Wilson's house, and his name was Ebby Thatcher. He didn't send him a pamphlet in the mail, to tithe 10% of his income or something. No, he went to his door, and they sat together for a long time. That's the blood. One person caring about another person. I think that's the phenomena of AA. So it's the blood and the ink, or the ink and the blood. I think, I just did a dyslexic thing there. I reversed it. The heading of the talk will be the ink and the blood. And I'm really going to spend a lot of time on the blood because you hear the ink all the time. Do the steps. There's 12 of them. And maybe if you're lucky, you might even be interested in the traditions. Have you done your 4th step yet? Oh, by the way, have you done your 11th? Did you do your 10th? You know, we hear this all the time. That's the ink. But the blood is why I'm here. People just like you took time out of their life so I could have one. That's the blood. And I'll started off with a really good example. And then I'll dive into why I chose this as a reading and its importance to the blood. I'm just about 2 years sober, and somebody in the room's got me a job working the graveyard shift in the Los Angeles Railroad. So like at 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'd be hitting tires, big truck tires with a steel pipe to make sure they were inflated. So when the trucks came to pick them up, they can have a safe journey to their destination. And that was my job. I thought it was kind of ridiculous, but I did what I was told because I could make a lot more money doing other things, you know. I'm sure you can imagine what that means. Well, one night in coming back, I think it was like 6 a.m., I got hit by a drunk on my motorcycle. I had an old Moto Guzzi, and I got hit, and it was a pretty severe accident. Ended up in the hospital with knee and shoulder surgery. And because of my history, which some of you have heard, and I'm going to tell a little of it now, nobody showed up. It wasn't mom, dad, sister, uncle, aunt. I was born to a prostitute in New York City in 1959, 3 months premature. And she dropped me in a bar across from Lenox Hill Hospital. And I went straight into the huge dysfunctional foster environment where I spent the majority of my life. So when I got hit on that motorcycle, there was no one to come. And they had asked me many times, who do we put on the emergency list? Who's coming to visit, right? Well, I'm so used to being alone that it wasn't a big deal. On the 5th day, just like all of your faces, the blood showed up. On the 5th day, my whole morning meeting filled that room because they hadn't seen me. They wondered, where was I? And I can tell you guys, nobody ever wondered where I was. Something happened to me that day that has still profoundly affected my life 36 years later. I'm 36 years sober. I uncontrollably cried. And I was so embarrassed that I was trying to hide my face in the pillow. And one of the lovely women in AA just grabbed my feet and held my feet, and another would put their hand on my forehead. And another gentleman in the meeting just put his hand on my heart. And I bawled out loud like a baby. I don't know if anyone's ever had that experience. I know it happens to people when, you know, a loved one passes in their life unexpectedly, or a pet. I mean, it just comes out of nowhere. It's profound. Well, that cracked me open. And that was the beginning of my journey and half of this topic, which is the blood. Those people took time out of their life to come see me in a hospital bed, and they didn't even know me. This is the profound thread that has put Alcoholics Anonymous on the map around the world. And not just AA, NACA, DA, you name it, all the A's. We gather in these tribal circles for a variety of reasons. Of course, the most obvious one is, and we don't even know it at the time, is that we're severely broken. That's part of the admission to get here. Some of it's through trauma. Some of it's through arrested development. A lot of it's through arrested development. And so when I say I'm grateful to be an alcoholic, it's not so much because all the experiences, but it's because it got me to a place where maybe I could finally figure out what the trauma was, what the arrested development was. And that's where the ink is really important, right? That's where it's really important. 1 through 6 unpacked all of that for me. 7 through 8, or I mean 7 through 12, that's the hinge that the whole program swung for me. It swung for me on 7 because it talks about character development. And you start to develop all of these wonderful things that it says in step 7, dividends. It starts throwing off these dividends. Well, they're kind of useless without the blood. When you get a sponsor, they spend time with you. What is a sponsor other than a miraculous friend that you probably didn't even know in your life, who puts you on his calendar, takes time out of their life? Do I need to mention, in a world of capitalism, excuse my political points of view, but for free? Before that job I had where I got hit on the motorcycle, you guys gave me an old International truck to live in, and that was literally my first address. Then somebody gave me an old Airstream, an old trailer to live in a really funky part of town. And you made sure that I had food to eat. And then one day somebody discovered, when they passed around the 12 by 12 in a meeting, that I would always pass, okay, no thanks. And somebody discovered I couldn't read. So I got to the program at the age of 30, unable to read or write. I had a 3rd grade reading level. For a variety of reasons. One of the legitimate ones was I was severely dyslexic. It could be that, the issues with the mom being a drug addict or an alcoholic. I also know that if I had stayed in the womb the full gestation period of 9 months, I'd probably have a very big forehead right now. And I would have what's called alcohol syndrome. So maybe that wasn't even a mistake. Because of those issues, nobody ever picked me up and brought me to a family. I ended up in what they call the tail end of all of these foster homes, where back then all the dope fiends knew that the more kids you got, the bigger check you got. And I didn't look good on paper, so nobody was really swooping me up. So not only did I not know about family, I hate to admit this, but it's true, I knew nothing about love, intimacy, transparency. Honesty is a tough word, but we can get to that in a minute. So the first real human experience I had came at the age, literally, of 32, when I got hit by that motorcycle, and I'm in that hospital bed. And all of these human beings who I hardly know were standing around my bed. Sometimes, like I shared when I started this meeting, just in silence. And somebody said, this morning while we were talking, they said, yeah, that's the difficult part for me, the silence. That's because the brain loves a hobby. And one of the beautiful things about the ink part of the blood and the ink of these books and the material is that we learn to meditate without even knowing it. The first meeting we go to, we're sitting for an hour listening. We don't even know that our body electric has shifted like a level or two, and all of a sudden our shoulders drop. We may be busy in the head, not listening or trying to interpret everything everybody's saying, but we're actually learning to meditate. We sit in it. Where else do we do that except maybe in court or the DMV, where you get your driver's license? Where else do you sit for an hour listening? I have to add a little humor to all of this. When I'm in that hospital bed and my morning meeting is surrounding me around that hospital bed, and my face is just full of saltwater tears, and people's hands are on my body. They're like touching me. It was profound. Anyway, they continued that for a couple more days. They finish up all the procedures. And at the end, when they're sort of exiting you out, the surgeon comes in and says, well, you did pretty good. You'll be all right. You'll have to do some rehab on the shoulder, blah, blah, blah. He says, but I wish you luck. And he says, I'm a little curious, though. You didn't put anyone down as a contact. But I have to tell you, I've been here for a decade, and I haven't seen what happened in this room anywhere. You have more friends than anybody I've ever met. Did you hear that? That's the blood. And then he said, you ready for the laughter? Hold on. He said, what I don't understand is, how come nobody doesn't know your last name? I'm here to see Tom. Tom, I don't know. He's a really good friend of mine. I love the guy. He's a really good friend of mine. Tom who? I don't know. Oh, man. Oh, man. And that's as real as it gets right there. We talk about spiritual experiences. We talk about the release you get when you do your fifth step, We talk about, we should talk a lot about the healthy affirmations in the ink part of the blood in the ink. And what are those healthy affirmations? They're rarely used as topics in meetings. I would certainly love to hear more about them. And it's called a psychic change. What is that? What is that? We hear the fourth dimension. What is that? What is the expression that you'll tap into unsuspected inner resources? I plan to spend a lot of time on that towards the end of this pitch. What are those inner resources? Well, we know what the negative ones are, right? They got us here. That arrested development, maybe those traumas. We know what they are. But what are the ones he's talking about after we're here? Well, what's the other part of the book that says it's designed to succeed? What does that mean? I remember Henry Thoreau said most of us are more worried about growing than we're worried about living more than we are dying. We're concerned more about living than we are dying. We're afraid to live. For me, that was definitely my case because I felt less than because I didn't have an education. I didn't get past 8th grade. I felt less than because I didn't have opportunity of any kind. And although I didn't know what love was, I felt angry because I didn't have it, like it was a possession. Little did I know decades later that love is like gravity and oxygen. Gravity doesn't decide if you get more or less than I do. And oxygen doesn't decide that, Mike from Oregon gets more than I do or Robert gets more gravity than I do. No, love is the same force. And until it has its way with you, you think it's something personal. Oh, I'm in love with this person. And we personalize it. And I think that accounts for so much heartbreak. In these rooms, I got introduced to the most authentic experience of love that helped me to understand what poets write about. Something that transcends even like civilization. And I plan to end with that because it's really important. I wrote out a little thing here about the blood in the ink. So I think you guys get what I mean by the ink now, right? The ink is the material. And before the material, Ebby didn't have any material. Oh, he had a little from the Oxford group when he went to Bill Wilson's house. But when Bill went to Dr. Bob's house, there was nothing written, right? Where did that come from? Well, he knew he'd stayed sober by helping someone else. All of a sudden, something starts percolating in Alcoholics Anonymous long before they wrote any of the ink. And it's called empathy. And if there's any legacy to humanity about this group or this that we're part of, is that it relieves suffering and nurtures empathy. I genuinely care about you guys. Now that's easier said than done, but because you might not know me. But those people in the room who personally know me know that it's a big part of my life. I put it in front of everything. And I'm grateful for that. I gave up being a competitive human being so I can spend more time caring about others. Doesn't that sound crazy? But little did I know that's the secret to my sobriety. That's the secret to my 36 years. New people and wet drunks are my favorite, and they're the stepping stones to my growth. Not some intellectual insight about interpreting step 10 and my daily inventory. No, it's being with somebody whose life is falling apart and they feel like absolute shit and they have a gun in their mouth. And I can tell you of the 400 plus 12 steps and interventions that I have done, sometimes they pull the trigger and I'm standing in a room filled with blood. I have a lot of those stories because I do a lot of 12-step work. The house behind me that you see, I've had over 30 newcomers live here. In my backyard, my front yard, even in my house. For 19 plus years, I've had a men's step study and traditions group. That's an easy 1,000 people. I've had over 7,000 people in my backyard every October 20th for 26 years. A couple of hundred people each event. It's a big event. I'm sharing those with you because that's the blood. It broke me out of just going to school and learning about the steps and the traditions and writing out my fourth. The blood is what humanized this animal. Or as somebody said earlier today, Sandy said that she remembered the quote from another meeting, this knuckle-dragging Neanderthal became a human being. And I think I'd like to spend some time talking about that. That's the blood. I know this is going to sound a little arrogant, but in my 36 years of being on the battlefield, you cannot stay sick forever. The program is not designed to fail. It's designed to succeed. And what does that look like? Well, to be honest, in my case, it was a lot easier being a drunk, a drug addict, small and angry and dysfunctional. It was easy. I didn't have to ask the important questions. I didn't have to take time out of my life to care about you. I didn't have to learn about forgiveness. I didn't have to investigate this experience with God. I didn't have to dig deep. Let's just be honest, right? I didn't have to dig deep. There were no columns to write about Mr. Bob or Mr. Brown. There's none of that. It was just this angry, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal wondering where his fair share of the pie was and why was I dealt such a bad deck of cards. Boy, that's a drug in itself. In my early sobriety, I turned recovery into a drug by pontificating the ink and never, not once, involving a newcomer in my life. Service isn't service unless it's inconvenient. There's one to hold on to. But don't you know, I don't have time for that because I'm busy. I had no idea that you were the secret to my growth. Ebby knew that when he went to Bill Wilson's house. Bill Wilson knew that when he went to Dr. Wild's house. We know that when we spend time with someone who's suffering, we know that they're the secret to our growth. That's the blood. That's the blood. I'm going to tell you my experience and not pontificate what you should do and not do. I'm going to tell you the blood gave me an experience of consciousness. Now that sounds like a $10 word, but I'll give $10 to anybody here who tells me how many times that word is mentioned in the big book. Consciousness. What? What are we reading here? Why is Carl Jung in there? Why is Herbert Spencer in there? Why is William James in there? What are we talking when we're talking about consciousness? What are we talking about when we're talking about a psychic change? What's really going on here? It's called an awakening, right? And what are we awakening to? And it's pretty hard to awaken when you're holding on to your trauma, or when you're holding on to your arrested development, resentment, anger. Where's my fair share of the pie? I think it's important, so I'm taking the risk of sharing with you my personal experience, not telling anyone in here how they should do AA or any 12-step program. Why is that? Because this is the most brilliant democracy on the planet. Nobody's in charge. And the only thing anybody wants from you is what's in your best interest. Now, you tell me where you find that anywhere in the world. That's why it's revolutionary. And I think I'll jump forward a little here and go out of my list, even though my list is important. My list is about the blood and the ink and how and the difference between that, right? And then how the blood leads to an awakening, right? And then I have the awakening leads to like love and then gratitude. So I'm going to finish that list, but I want to go outside the circle here and tell you, like, 6 years sober, 7, my brain started waking up, and my sponsor was doing a really good job of teaching me how to read. By the way, I learned to read from these books. That's pretty cool, right? I found myself at the base camp of Everest in a Tibetan monastery called Kopan. And there, because I was reading, of all things, a book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not anything, really. Thanks to AA, I can be anything I want. A God of your own understanding? Get out of here. 100 years ago, they would have burned me at the stake. And that's real, by the way. That's real stuff right there. They'd kill you. I met an 80-year-old Tibetan Rinpoche who knew more about the phenomena of these 12 steps than any living human being I'd ever met. He blew my mind. He referred to the 12 steps as the fastest moving spiritual movement on the planet. And I have this thing that I like to do if I'm asked to talk. I like to have a big board behind me, and I can pencil out how big it really is. I can prove it through the math of how many people right now are sitting in a tribal circle of these 12 steps, improving the quality of the human condition on a daily basis. How many people in London, all of London right now, do you think are in a 12-step meeting, including Al-Anon, NA, CA? Just anybody got a number for me? Just curiosity. Just let's playfully throw out a number. 10,000? In one day? Right? How about all of Europe? Oh, the number just jumped. What are we talking about now? Maybe 50,000 in one day? Right? How about the United States? Oh my gosh. There's traditionally 3 meetings a day. Okay, do that math. Okay, you ready? Hold on to your seat. Times that by 365 days. And this monk knew all of this, and he rattled it off like it was more important to him than the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He said there are more people attending this tribal circle than go to Mecca or the Hour of Power on Sunday, whatever your religion is. And nobody's in charge. It's one of the most powerful regulatory systems without anybody being in charge. And he told me to step into it. Don't waste too much time contemplating your navel, Tom. Get over here. Get over here. And the stepping stones are the wet drunks. The stepping stones are the newcomers. You can read and recite these books word for word. By the way, I'm one of those guys who can do that. I didn't know that I had a photographic memory. It certainly helps when you don't understand phonics and you can't spell, But I won't do that. I've learned not to do that because we're an example. And the attraction is an example, not a promotion. So you'll never see me with a megaphone telling you what to do. Because in here, everyone finds their own way. Like the third step says, go find a life of your own understanding through a God of your own understanding. The uniqueness just like your thumbprint. And that's the importance of going back to my list of consciousness. There are all these experiences that we haven't had the privilege yet, or I could say I have, because of that trauma or arrested development. I'd love to blame all of everything I've said on alcohol or drugs. I can't. Why? Because in the big book, Bill Wilson's writing, he says it's just a symptom. It's not my real problem. What are the real problems? The causes and the conditions. Those are the things you get to unpack through 1 and 6, but only with the help of another human being. That's the blood. So I'd like to think that some of you are wondering, how did this knuckle-dragging Neanderthal with an 8th grade dropout and a 3rd grade reading level able to construct these kind of sentences or thoughts? How did that happen? I never went back to school. I never went to school, right? How did this sort of cognitive articulation come about? Consciousness. That's the brilliance of AA. You people are some of the most amazing people I've ever met on the planet. You become better mothers, fathers, friends, brothers, sisters, contributors to society. It's fucking amazing. Excuse my language. It blows my mind. I know where you came from. I was there. What I don't know is where you're going. And that's why my sobriety is still exciting 36 years later. The guy that you're looking at in the screen, hopefully he's still holding your attention. I had no idea this version of me existed. I'm just going to say that again. I had no idea this version of Tom Jackson existed. And that's what we mean by I could have missed it. By being stuck and stupid. Or maybe being afraid to grow. A funny thing happened when I got hit by that drunk on my motorcycle. Truth is, I'd have been content doing that job for $5.75 an hour. I was just happy not to drink anymore. But that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I ended up having to go, because I was working when I got hit, they put me in some kind of like program, voc rehab or something. And for the first time in my life, I got tested. And they said, you can do anything. I said, no, that's okay. I got a job. I just want to go back to my meetings and leave me alone. Don't you know, I have a lot of pain. I told that story in my morning meeting, and AO said, are you crazy? You run back there and you do what they're asking you to do. And I didn't know what to do. So, of course, I entered into the field of substance abuse and addictionology and that whole thing, because it was easy, because you supported me. And I spent a decade in that career, and I got out of it really quick because I didn't know the industry was sicker than the people. They sell big books there for $20,000. And there's no blood. Here's the blood, right? So I am who I am, the guy you're looking at in this Hollywood Squares, because AA gave me the gift of consciousness. Now that is so easy to throw that word around, but like it says to you in one of our readings, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. I beg of you to spend some time looking up that word. And you'll discover over and over again, it's all about awakening. And what are we awakening to? Nothing new. Like Bill Wilson said, you'll tap into unsuspected inner resources. I never knew that this version of me existed. I never knew that the property that I now live and own would be filled with 7,000 people. That tells you more about who I am than anything I could say. So what happens after decades of having this intimate experience with consciousness? Well, it helped me get over all the arrested development. It helped me get over all the trauma. And I can tell you guys, the trauma is real as anybody in this room. I grew up in such horrific, abject poverty and violence and predatory behavior. I think at the age of 4, I watched a woman get nearly beat to death, but it wasn't just a beating, it was a deliberate torture. Eye popping out of the socket, broken bones. And I remember being a little boy, being wide awake, standing in the hallway, watching that. And that profoundly affected my life. It made me a serious person, and I didn't want to be one. After that, I never played a card game. I never did things that normal people did, like a sport or a fun day at Disneyland. I'm saying that because I see Mickey Mouse on Anne's shirt. And those traumas didn't stop until the age of 14, when I took off and I lived on the streets, and I made my living on the streets in New York City doing unimaginable things. From the age of 14, I think, to 18, where I had hair down to my waist and I hitchhiked across the country and ended up living in a commune in Northern California, smoking my own weight in weed and eating a lot of hallucinogenics. In the next 10 years, alcohol started killing me, and drugs. And that was a 10-year bottom where I ended up under a bridge in Long Beach, California. And I lived on a bicycle, and everything I owned was in a plastic bag. These stories are wonderful. I can entertain all day long with them, but they don't come close to where we get to go. Eventually, you have to drop the narrative of that person you dragged into room and make an investment in where you're going. And the fastest way to get there is through the blood, not the ink. We all know people that can recite the ink word for word, and I'm sorry to say, I'm not being judgmental, but some of it teach us what not to become. You know, I know less about who I am today at 65 years of age than I've ever known in my life, because it's not important anymore. Consciousness has made me aware that I was already given the gift of life. I'm alive. My sponsor used to say early on, when I had too many questions, he'd say, "Tom, when are you going to be quiet? Out of 10 million sperms, you made it. You're a good swimmer. Relax, kid. Relax. You're on the planet. Relax." I said, "Yeah, but you don't understand. I don't have 2 shoes that match. My teeth hurt. Where's my parents? Where's my job? Where's my agency? Who am I?" That just killed me. I think that's part of the reason I drank a lot. I was so broken. I didn't have a chance of getting off the runway. And I think that's the real story here. What do I have, a minute and something left there, Young? 2 minutes? I got to wrap it up, and I want to get down to the gratitude. You ready? Everything I'd mentioned, the blood and the ink, how it leads to consciousness, and how the consciousness through people led to love, and the love led to gratitude. It's a verb, not a noun. I'm going to try to make this quick. And the last 3 years have been a living nightmare for me. I'm sure it would have been easier if I still lived on that bicycle. But because I'm engaged in life, a lot happens. And in the last 3 years, we all had a tough time with COVID. I lost 5 of the dearest friends of my life who I talked to every day for 30 years. I watched them die. And the most important woman in my life, I was talking with her like we are now, and she had a brain aneurysm. And my heart was so broken that my life was falling apart. COVID stripped me of my businesses that I had developed over 30 years. There was no income. I thought I was going to lose my home. All of a sudden, I get shingles and I'm really sick. And things get worse. I get a brutal cancer diagnosis. I'm a year and a half out of having a part of my tongue removed and radical neck surgery 10 inches from my ear to my Adam's apple and a whole bunch of lymph nodes removed, and told that after the surgery, it has metastasized and it's spreading throughout my lymph node system, and I have an expiration date. Why am I telling you all of that? Because I want to let you know, no matter what you have going on in your life, if you participate in where we're going and you allow a new version of you to appear, you don't have to drink again, no matter what's going on. My life is so full that you can take me right after this meeting. You can take me right now, as a matter of fact. I've been so goddamn overpaid, it's not funny. I've been able to solve all of that dysfunction, the brokenness, the heartbreak, the trauma. That all got sorted out by the ink and the blood. And then I was just left with love and gratitude. And it's because of this deep feeling of gratitude, I'm able to be okay even with death. Now that's a change in consciousness. So I say this, and please hear me. Thank you for my life. It has been a wild journey. And if you're new or nearly new in here, put your seatbelt on. Because it really is the ride of your life. Your most valuable asset is your sober mind. And when your heart fills up, I want to be around for it. I want to be around for that. I want to help celebrate that. So, wow, that went quick, that went really quick. Thank you guys for my life. And I'm just going to tell you, I love you.